Hello, my name is Rob Durham,
And I'm John Chappell.
and you're listening to another edition of the Gyrolab Spin. Today we're going to be talking about how the Gyrolab can be used in a regulated environment. And so what John and I'd like to do is just have this discussion. We'll walk through a few slides and talk about how the Gyrolab is currently used to support clinical trials and in manufacturing environments. Right?
Yeah, we'll probably have a follow-up podcast in the future to specifically talk about the use of Gyrolab in a quality control and a QC environment, because we haven't covered that in great detail today, because that's another area that we feel requires a follow-up.
So in this slide, John, you can see that we've listed off a number of the partners that we have around the globe who use the Gyrolab system, and I think one of the things that you can take note of in this graphic is that quite a large number of them do use it in a regulated environment.
Yeah, I would say the majority of our customers do operate in a regulated space, so we really much designed our instrument, also software, about maintaining compliance in regulated space for GxP requirements. So it's very important actually for our customers that we consider the regulatory use of our instrument.
So I think it's important to understand from the Gyros perspective, we've done a lot of work to try and make sure that we have systems in place to support the usage of the Gyros in the regulated space. So John, why don't you walk us through some of the tools that Gyros provides our customers to accomplish this?
So the important thing is all software packages are CFR 21 Part 11 compliance, which ensures that the electronic records that are generated are safe and secure. We have an audit trail, so you know exactly which user has done what in the software, and obviously we have predefined software user access. So for example, administrator role that administers user accounts, users, and also method developers, for example. And the important is we have the option to generate uneditable raw data and reports for each run. But a lot of our customers will use a LIMS system, so we have a kind of a
LIMS interface, right?
Interface, yeah,
right?
exactly.
So that you can essentially plan your runs in your LIMS system and then use the Gyro system to execute the run, and then the data comes back in an integrated way that's protected and secure.
Exactly. And we also have training courses for users, so we can sign off and certify users on the instrument.
Yeah.
And another important thing is equipment qualifications, IQ, OQ. Yeah. So when an instrument is installed, we can provide a documentation package to show all the testing that's been done, and that the instrument has been fully tested and meets manufacturers and operational specifications. And also we can give guidance on a performance qualification that they need to perform.
Right. So a performance qualification test would be something like a standard method that you run to prove that the instrument is doing its thing.
Exactly. And we also provide a functionality test, which can be used on a monthly basis to ensure that the instrument is operating, and can also be used when, for example, for diagnostic purposes, if there is an error on the instrument. Yep. So you can sit to make sure the instrument is fully functional. And I think the other thing we're going to talk about today is that we're also offering support for computer systems validation. So later in this podcast, we'll go through how we can support that very important activity.
Excellent. So here, this just shows the brochure that we provide that sort of gives all those details to customers who are interested in working in a regulated environment, what Gyros provides, both from the system validation as well as software validation. We'll get into more detail about that.
Yeah, it just shows, it really just gives a guide to all the compliance that we have with our software with GxP requirements.
One of the things I really wanted to point out is that the Gyros manufacturing facility is under ISO 9001 certification, which is a really strict manufacturing guideline, and that gives us benefits in terms of what we produce.
Yeah, it's an important quality management system, so it ensures that that our CDs or buffers are controlled and produced under a quality system.
All of the lots of CDs that we produce come with a certificate of analysis that can be had. And I think one of the things that I know from having used the system for a number of years is very rarely do we see a problem with the CD, right? So the QC of the CDs goes through validating the geometry of the disc after it's produced, making sure that all of the fluidics channels are aligned properly, the column size is appropriate, and that it binds the required amount of material. So it goes through a rigorous set of checks during manufacturing.
I mean, something that's really impressed me looking at the production of these CDs, of all the quality steps and all the checks that actually go into making the CD. So it'd be really nice in the future to actually do a video on on this process, because it is very interesting.
It would be fun to see show everybody exactly how they're made. But that's the thing we wanted to just reiterate today as part of this idea of using us in a regulated environment. You can be confident that the CDs, the plates for us, the assay plates that you're using, are manufactured with very high quality.
One important question we always get from our customers is, will data be accepted by the regulators? It is very important that data does meet quality requirements. So the system that the data is generated on should be 21 CFR Part 11 compliant. You should ensure that the system has data integrity. So that's, in other words, that data cannot be altered or deleted. It's important that you do equipment qualification and you perform a computer systems validation. But most importantly is that the assay that you use to actually analyze the samples should be fully validated and should actually be to FDA and EMA guidances, which is now kind of with ICH M10, which is harmonized guidance for global analytical validations. And you should monitor the performance of the assay. So you do in-study assay performance that involves looking at the QC data. And also, you should, particularly for pharmacokinetic assays, you should do incurred sample reanalysis. So you do a certain number of reanalysis of the samples, normally 10% or 5% depending on the size of your study. And you should look at the data and summarize the performance of the assay in a bioanalytical report, or even for a biomarker report. So it's important that everything is well documented and that you follow full good scientific principles.
Yeah, I think the bottom line is, you have to have something where you can hold up data and justify that the work you've done meets the needs for the intended use of the data. If it's going to be supporting a clinical research trial, then you've got to be able to show that the data has been validated to a rigorous standard.
No, exactly.
And I think, what we hope to show today is that the Gyros certainly more than meets that requirement and has been used quite regularly in that space. So here's a sampling of a variety of different authors who have published work to support clinical trials and the clinical usage of the Gyros, principally for PK and some biomarker analysis in this list of publications. But I think one of the things that we can point to is, why would they use the Gyrolab? And I think for the most part, John, I think most people would agree that the benefits to the Gyrolab have been to sort of automate the manual plate-based ELISA process. And that really...
Yeah, I mean, it reduces manual errors, it reduces variability.
Yeah.
I think it's quite important, and it gives a real benefit from using the Gyrolab.
Yeah, I think there have been some cases where things like matrix interference and so forth were improved by using a flow-through technique such as is available on the Gyrolab system. But I think by and large, most of the folks that are out there wanting to reduce the human variability, and the art of doing a plate-based ELISA is sort of removed when you add that automation piece.
Yeah, I mean, going back to will my data be accepted by the regulators? People, particularly when a new technology comes around, they're always scared to actually present new data from a new platform. Right. But I think Gyrolab now isn't accepted in the industry. It's not something to be scared of. Data on the platform will be accepted as long as it has the right amount of scientific rigor.
Exactly, and we are coming up on our 20th anniversary for the manufacture of these CDs and using the gyros in an immunoassay application. And so I think we're well beyond the new kid on the block.
No, exactly.
So let's turn our attention now to computer system validation. And in this slide deck, we're going to talk a bit about the process. So John, why don't you walk us through what we'll hear?
Yeah, so computer systems validation is a very important process. It does, in a lot of companies, it requires coordination between quality assurance and IT. And because it's a quality system, but obviously it's software and it requires IT expertise really to actually interpret a lot of the data. And a lot of procedures are company specific. So if you look at a CSV package from one company, it will follow a very different procedure to another company. And I found I've worked for a number of different companies, and the actual processes are slightly different, although the absolute aims are the same. Mm-hmm. And the important thing is to test CFR 21 Part 11 compliance, but also to ensure data integrity. And data integrity is something that's become more important over the last 2-3 years. Because you can have a system that's Part 11 compliant, but there are, for example, ability to delete data. So
yeah, exactly.
So the two things go hand in hand. And it does, that's the other thing, is the testing has to be done in the user environment. So on the network where the instrument's going to be operating. So anything that can affect how the data is generated is very important. So a general overview of the CSV, or computer system validation process, is you have a user required specification. So it's how you want to use the system and what requirement it needs to make. You need to look at the electronic record and electronic system requirements. Then you have a traceability matrix to look at your requirements and how they're going to be tested. Then you come up with a validation plan of how you're going to do your testing, and also your test script, so that's your performance testing. And then you go through the process of actually testing the software, which is IQ, OQ, PQ of the software, and then you summarize that in a validation report, and it generates lots and lots of documentation.
Right, and so the idea is we use electronic records to reduce the number of paper documents there are out there, but it creates a lot of paper in the process.
Yeah, I remember once talking to a regulator, and they were more impressed with how much paper was generated as part of the process and what the actual documents actually said.
Yeah.
So it is important, it's something probably in the future that can be streamlined, I'm sure.
Yeah.
So in terms of CSV testing, in general, the test scripts for actually doing a CSV testing, it would include things like looking at user roles, looking at the users and how they're administered as part of the software, and then actually operating the instrument. Because software and the instrument are interconnected, so to actually run the instrument you have to operate the software. So even when you're doing your equipment qualification, this incorporates obviously using the software. So it's important that we test the operation of the software. And then from a Gyrolab perspective, with the option of looking at different methods using multiple CD types would be included, for example. So the next part of CSV testing really is to look at your data security to ensure that data can be backed up and restored. For example, if it's accidentally deleted, or for example, you have a power failure or something happens to your drive, for example. So it's important that data can be reproduced if and it's secure. And it's also important that any user using the software, there's an audit trail to show exactly which user has actually done what in the software. So that's very important.
So now that we've talked a bit about what the computer system validation looks like, we want to think about how Gyros has tried to streamline the process and speed along the workflow so that you don't tie up the system for months and months in your computer system validation. So here you can see we've expanded the Gyrolab validation package offer to go beyond just the IQOQ instrument qualification to include software validation. So John, why don't you walk us through what these tools look like and how they're used typically?
Yeah, so the first thing we have is the Gyrolab software simulator. So this gives the Gyrolab software on a laptop, which can be used to simulate the instrument, and it allows the end user to be able to design and start doing the test scripts.
Right.
And it's also, by doing that, they're obviously not preventing somebody using the instrument. So it allows for the instrument, the current instrument, say in its validated state, to be continued to be used. So what it's trying to do is reduce downtime for existing customers who want to upgrade their software, but obviously they don't want to take their instrument out of a validated state. Obviously, the other option is to obviously purchase a new instrument with the new software, which isn't ideal for everybody, but obviously would do the same thing.
Exactly. And then so I think sometimes this takes quite a long time. You know, we're talking 9 months.
Yeah, I know. I mean, probably the shortest time I've seen a CSV done is probably in around 3 months.
Yeah.
But it can take 4 to 6 months, and it's a laborious process to get all the test scripts written, and then your testing, you know, and then also the review of the data by quality assurance, etc. Yeah. So it is a long process. And then we have the validation package, which is test scripts. So what we've done is trying to provide test scripts that customers can then incorporate into their CSV process. So it provides all the testing for things like CFR 21 Part 11 compliance, because we recognize that customers have their own approach, so and they want to do the CSV under their own procedures. So we try to provide something that can be incorporated into company procedures.
Right. So it's like they don't have to start from scratch. Right?
Exactly.
And they don't know. We know our software and what it's supposed to do, and then we can write scripts that help speed that process along.
Exactly. And we hope that they can take our test scripts verbatim and then even put them onto their own document templates to incorporate it. So this shows you really the kind of more detail about the validation package. So this shows you kind of your test mapping. It tells you what your requirements are. So for requirements, in example, for CFR Part 11 compliance, and then it tells you what tests, and it gives you your test sort of case and how to test that requirement, and that allow the user then to run through these tests, which would then demonstrate the CFR Part 21 Part 11 compliance of the software.
Right, and so altogether then what this is aiming to do is to really short circuit the process and help speed along the process of the validation, providing scripts that will allow the customers to test all the various aspects of the software in a relatively streamlined way, and in hopes to speed and make the process less onerous on the user to get their validation done.
Yeah, the alternative is that the end user has to go through the whole software and design every test and do exactly this sort of thing. But obviously, it takes weeks of maybe months of time to actually design the test. So all the tests here will meet the regulatory requirements, and can be incorporated into customers' procedures.
Right, and so I mean, we wrote the software, so we ought to know how to test it. So I think this is a really useful way to move forward. Well, thanks, John. It's been great talking with you again. I always enjoy getting on the podcast and having a good chat. Listen, if you like what you heard, please hit the like button and also subscribe to the channel. That way you'll hear when a new podcast comes out, if it's something that's interesting to you. We're always interested in having feedback from the folks out there. If you'd like to see something you haven't heard or have some feedback on anything you heard today, you say, we'd like to hear more about that, or we have some thoughts about what you could do differently, better. We're always looking for that kind of feedback. John, any final thoughts?
Yeah, no, thanks everyone. Yeah, as Rob said, please, if you have any questions, comments, please contact us. We'll be happy to answer your questions, and we look forward to our next podcast.
Great. Until then.
Thank you.